The Galactic Council chamber was filled with the soft hum of energy fields and the quiet chatter of dozens of alien species. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing star maps, trade routes, and fleet positions. It was a regular session, a boring one by most standards. Ambassador Vethal of the Zorath Dominion was halfway through a speech about grain tariffs when the alarm went off. The sound cut through everything, loud, sharp. Red light washed over the chamber walls. Every alien in the room went still. A young Zorath aide rushed to Vethal's side and pressed a data chip into his four-fingered hand. Vethal read it. Then he read it again. His pale blue skin flushed a deep violet, which was the Zorath way of showing shock. "There is a vessel," he said slowly, "in the outer drift. It does not match any known design." The chamber erupted. Questions flew from every corner. What kind of vessel? How large? Where exactly in the outer drift? Was it armed? Supreme Commander Grax of the Keth Imperium stood up from his seat. Grax was enormous, even by Keth standards. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in dark brown scales, with 4 thick arms folded across a chest, like a wall of armor plate. His species had conquered 11 star systems. He did not panic easily. "Show me," he said. The holographic map expanded. At the far edge of the outer drift, a single vessel sat in open space. It was not large by military standards, perhaps 400 meters from end to end. Its shape was strange, smooth in some places, angular in others. It had no visible weapon ports, no energy signature that matched any weapon the Council had on record. But what made the room go completely silent was the data tag beneath the vessel's image. Species, unknown. Origin, unknown. Threat level, unclassified. "Run it again," said Admiral Sewell of the Drahari. Her species had the largest database of known spacefaring civilizations in the galaxy. They had records going back 60,000 years. "Run the identification scan again." The scan ran again. The result came back the same. Species, unknown. "That is not possible," Sewell said, her voice flat and cold. "We have records of every civilization capable of interstellar travel. Every one. Our archive goes back to before the first expansion." "Apparently not every one," said a quiet voice from the back of the room. It was Counselor Preen of the Lan, a small species of thin-limbed, large-eyed beings who said very little, but always seemed to know more than they let on. Preen had 3 of his 4 eyes fixed on the holographic display. The 4th was watching Grax. "We should send a communication probe," Preen said, "before anything else." Grax looked at him the way a stone wall looks at a leaf. "We should send a fleet," he said. "To an unknown vessel that has done nothing threatening," Preen replied. "To establish authority," Grax said. "That is how you greet the unknown, with strength." The debate went on for nearly 2 hours. In the end, a compromise was reached. A single communications ship, escorted by 2 light patrol cruisers, would approach the unknown vessel and attempt contact. If no response was received within a standard cycle, a larger force would be dispatched. It seemed reasonable. It seemed measured. It was the kind of decision that looked good in the meeting room. It did not account for what the vessel actually was. The ship was called the ISV Resolute. It was not a warship. It was not even a particularly impressive ship by the standards of its creators. It was a long-range survey and first contact vessel belonging to something called the Terran Exploratory Service, operated by a species that called themselves humans. The humans had been in space for about 300 years. They had not, in that time, encountered any other spacefaring species. They had found ruins, empty stations, dead worlds with the cold ghosts of civilizations on them. They had found a great deal of silence. Captain Sarah Vance stood on the bridge of the Resolute and looked at the data her sensors were feeding her. She was not a tall woman. She was not an intimidating one. She had short, dark hair going gray at the temples, a face full of lines from years of sun and stress, and eyes the color of old wood. She had been doing this job for 22 years. She had the calm look of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything the universe threw at her. "Multiple signals," said her sensor operator, a young man named Chen. "I'm picking up energy signatures consistent with advanced propulsion systems, lots of them, and they're organized." "How many ships?" Vance asked. "Hard to say exactly. The drift interferes with the count, but at least 40, maybe more. Chen looked up from his console. Captain, this looks like a civilization, a big one. Vance nodded slowly. She had trained for this moment. Every officer in the Terran Exploratory Service had trained for this moment. But training and reality were two different animals. All stop, she said. Cut propulsion to minimal. Run full passive scan. I want to know everything about those ships before we say hello. Yes, Captain. And someone wake up Dr. Osei. Dr. Kwame Osei was the Resolute's chief xenolinguist and first contact specialist. He was a heavy-set man who wore his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead even in space, as if he expected at any moment to sit down at a desk with a stack of papers. He arrived on the bridge still pulling on his jacket, blinking sleep from his eyes. What do we have? He asked. Spacefaring civilization, Vance said. Multiple vessels. Significant energy output. They've been watching us since we entered the drift. Osei's eyes went wide. Then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that came from a man who had spent 40 years preparing for something and was now watching it happen. Are they communicating? Not yet, but I think they will. He was right. 20 minutes later, the communications array picked up a transmission. It was tight beam, directed precisely at the Resolute. Whoever was sending it had good enough sensors to know exactly where the Resolute was and to aim right at it. Can you decode it? Vance asked. Osei sat down at the linguistics console and started working. The transmission was complex. Multiple layered signals, as if the sender had prepared for the possibility that the receiver might not understand the primary channel. Clever, Osei murmured. They're sending on multiple frequencies simultaneously, mathematical sequences in one layer, visual data in another, and audio in a third. He looked up. They've done first contact before. Can you get anything from the visual layer? Working on it, his fingers moved fast across the console. This is going to take time, but yes, I think I can build a picture. Vance turned back to the main display. 40 ships, at minimum, all of them waiting, all of them watching. She thought about the training, the protocols, the long documents written by people who had imagined this moment. Then she thought about her crew. 87 people, one ship. Prepare a response, she said. Mirror their format. Mathematical sequences, visual data, audio. Keep it simple. Show them we're peaceful. Show them we're intelligent. She paused. And show them we're not afraid. Back on the communications ship sent by the Council, things were not going well. The ship's captain, a Drahari named Kos, had been expecting to approach an unknown vessel and send a greeting. Simple, standard. What he had not expected was for the unknown vessel to respond before his ship even reached optimal communication range. The response came in on a clean signal. No noise, no interference. It matched the Council's own transmission format almost perfectly, with only minor differences that Kos's communications officer said looked like deliberate simplifications. They understood our signal, his communications officer said. Her voice had an edge of something that was not quite fear, but was not far from it. In less than 1 standard hour, they decoded our layered transmission and responded in kind. That should not be possible, Kos said, not without prior exposure to our communication systems. It is not possible, she agreed, and yet, Kos sent a tight beam back to the Council ship. He needed to report this. He needed someone with more authority to tell him what to do. The message that came back was from Supreme Commander Grax himself. Maintain distance. Do not engage. Fleet is being prepared. Kos looked at the message for a long time. Then he looked at the unknown vessel on his display. It was just sitting there, quiet, patient. He had a feeling, deep in his chest where instinct lived, that sending a fleet was a mistake. He sent that feeling up the chain of command too. No one listened. The response from the unknown vessel had caused a bigger stir than anyone expected. It was not just that they had responded, it was what they had sent back. In the visual layer of their response, the unknown vessel had included something that no one in the Council chamber had expected. A map. A star map, showing their point of origin. A single star, smaller than most, with a handful of rocky worlds around it. One of those worlds was highlighted, and next to the map was a simple message, translated by the Council's own linguistic engines after considerable effort. "We come in peace. We have been looking for you for a long time." The chamber went quiet when that was read out. Not the silence of shock, the silence of people thinking very hard. "They've been looking for us," Preen said, almost to himself, "for a long time." "It could be a deception," Grax said. He had his arms crossed. His tone said he had already made up his mind. "Or it could be exactly what it says," Preen replied. "Unknown civilizations do not get the benefit of the doubt," Grax said. "Not until we know their strength. Not until we know their numbers. Not until we know if they are a threat." "And how do we determine that without talking to them?" Grax did not answer. He turned back to the tactical display, where the slow, steady shapes of his fleet were gathering. Preen watched him. Then Preen looked at the message again. "We come in peace. We have been looking for you for a long time." He thought about what it meant to look for someone for a long time and find only silence. He thought about what it did to a species, to search the dark between stars and find nothing alive. He thought about what kind of people kept searching anyway. He thought the Council was about to make a very serious mistake. He said so, loudly, to the full chamber. Nobody listened to him either. On the Resolute, Captain Vance read the incoming transmission from the unknown ships and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope, but also unease. "They responded to our map," Osei said. He was almost bouncing in his seat. "They sent back a visual acknowledgement. They know where we're from." "And they're sending more ships," Chen said from the sensor station. His voice was quieter. "A lot more. The signatures in the drift are growing. Whatever's out there is getting bigger." Vance looked at the display. The energy signatures were multiplying. Not 2 patrol ships. Not 10. The count was still climbing. "How many, Chen?" "At current rate of increase," he ran the calculation. "Somewhere between 200 and 300 vessels. Military class. Big ones." The bridge went quiet. Vance stood very still for a moment. She thought about protocols. She thought about what the rules said to do when a first contact situation turned into something that looked more like a standoff. Then she thought about something her old captain had told her, years ago, during her first deep space mission. He had said, "The galaxy will test you. It will send you things you are not ready for. The only question is whether you face them standing up or sitting down." She straightened her back. "Get me a clean channel," she said. "Direct to the lead vessel. I want to talk to whoever is in charge over there." "Captain," Chen said carefully, "there are 300 ships coming at us." "I know," she said, "which is exactly why we need to talk to them before they get any closer." She sat down in her command chair and folded her hands in her lap. She looked calm. She had worked very hard to look calm. "Channel open," said the communications officer. Vance leaned forward. "This is Captain Sarah Vance of the Terran Exploratory Service vessel, ISV Resolute. We are a peaceful survey mission from a star called Sol, located at the coordinates we have already transmitted to you. We have traveled a long way to find life in this galaxy. We are glad to have found it." She paused. "We have noticed your fleet. We are not running from it. We are asking, instead, for the chance to speak. We believe that is what both our peoples have been hoping for." She sat back. The channel stayed open. The Resolute waited. 300 ships waited on the other side of the darkness. And somewhere in the council chamber, in a seat near the back, a small alien named Preen closed 3 of his 4 eyes and hoped that someone on the other side of that darkness was wise enough to answer. The council did not answer. That was the first mistake. Supreme Commander Grax had ordered a communications blackout. No contact with the unknown vessel until the fleet was in position. His reasoning was simple. You do not negotiate from a position of weakness. You show your strength first, then you talk. It made sense to him. It was how the Keth had always done things. It was how they had built an empire across 11 star systems. You showed up with enough firepower to end a civilization, and then you asked your questions from that high ground. The problem was that the species on the other side of the outer drift had a very different way of thinking. Captain Vance waited 22 minutes for a response to her hail. When none came, she did not panic. She did not order the Resolute to run. She turned to Osei and said, simply, "They're not talking." "No," Osei agreed. He was watching the linguistic analysis still running on the earlier transmissions. "But look at this." He pulled up a secondary display. The first messages they sent were multi-layered, sophisticated. Whoever built that system has done first contact many times before. He paused. "This silence is a choice." "They're stalling," said Lieutenant Haruki from the navigation console. She was young, one of the youngest officers on the ship, but sharp in the way that quiet people often are. "They're waiting for something." "The fleet," Chen said from sensors. His voice was flat. "They're waiting for the fleet to arrive. Captain, the signatures are consolidating. Whatever they've gathered out there, it's moving. And it's moving toward us." Vance looked at the tactical display. The energy signatures had resolved into clear shapes now. Big ships. Very big ships. Some of them were larger than anything humanity had ever built. The formation was organized, disciplined, layered in a way that only came from long practice. She did a quick count. 240 vessels. Against one. "Are they broadcasting on any open frequency?" she asked. "No," said the communications officer. "Tight beam between their own ships only. We're picking up the edges of it but can't decode the content." "They're not trying to communicate with us," Haruki said. "They're coordinating." Vance nodded slowly. She understood what she was looking at. She had read the history. Not just human history, but the history of first contact simulations, of war games, of every scenario the Terran Exploratory Service had modeled in the 3 centuries since humanity first reached the stars. This was not a greeting. This was a show of force. "All right," she said. She kept her voice very steady. "Options." "We run," said Chen. "Jump drive is ready. We can be out of the drift in 4 minutes." "They'll track our jump vector," Haruki said. "If they have the sensor technology to pick us up at this range and aim a tight beam communication at us, they can track where we go." "So we'd lead them back to human space," Vance said. "Yes. What else?" Osei raised a hand. "We try again. Different approach. We've been using their format. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we need to do something they've never seen before." Vance looked at him. "What did you have in mind?" He smiled. It was the same smile from before, the one that came from 40 years of preparation, meeting the moment it had prepared for. "I want to try something a little unusual," he said. In the council chamber, the mood was split. On one side was Grax, surrounded by the military bloc, the Keth, the Drahari, the Vorath collective. Between them, they controlled more than half the fleet in the outer drift. They were in favor of the current approach. Show up with overwhelming force. Demand the unknown vessel identify itself. Stand down. Allow boarding and inspection. Standard procedure for an unregistered vessel in contested space. On the other side was a smaller group, Preen and the Lan delegation. 2 members of the Salathi, a species of scholars who rarely spoke on military matters, and, somewhat surprisingly, Ambassador Vethal, who had begun the session arguing about grain tariffs, and now found himself questioning whether the council was about to do something deeply stupid. "We have not given them a chance to speak," Vethal said. He addressed the chamber formally, because he was still an ambassador and old habits died hard. Their initial response was peaceful. It was articulate. It showed intelligence and, I would argue, good faith. "Good faith," Grax repeated, as if the words tasted bad. "We do not know their capabilities. We do not know their numbers. We do not know if there are more of them waiting somewhere beyond our sensor range. And we will not know any of those things," Preen said, "until we talk to them. We will know their capabilities when our fleet arrives and they either fight or surrender," Grax said. A silence fell over the chamber. It was the kind of silence that came after something had been said, that could not be unsaid. Vethal looked at Grax for a long moment. Then he looked around the room, at the holographic displays, at the fleet moving into position. "Supreme Commander," he said carefully. "What if they do neither?" Grax frowned. "What?" "What if they do not fight, and they do not surrender? What if they do something we are not expecting? An unknown vessel against 240 of our ships," Grax said. "There is nothing they can do." Vethal thought about that. He looked at the data again. The unknown vessel had decoded a layered first contact transmission in less than an hour. With no prior exposure to Council communication formats, he thought about what kind of mind that required. He was not sure Grax was right. What Dr. Osei did was this. He composed a message. But instead of using the standard first contact format, instead of mathematical sequences and star maps and formal language, he did something that no one in the Galactic Council's long history of first contact scenarios had ever thought to do. He told a story. It started with a simple visual sequence. A small world, blue and green, seen from space. Then the camera, so to speak, pulled back, and you saw the world as it was 300 years ago, before the first ships launched. A world that had no idea it was alone in the universe. Then ships, small at first, probes, then crewed vessels, then colony ships. Humanity spreading out, slowly, carefully, into a galaxy that seemed utterly empty. And then the images changed. They showed not triumphant expansion, but searching. Ships scanning dead worlds, teams walking through ancient ruins, scientists recording the remains of civilizations that had ended long before humanity was born. The message had no words at first, just images, but the emotion of it was clear, even without translation. Loneliness. And then at the end, one more image. The Resolute, seen from outside, small against the great dark. And next to it, so the scale was clear, a representation of the fleet arrayed against it. And then a single phrase, translated into the Council's own language, using their own linguistic keys. We are not your enemy. We are not afraid. We only want to talk. Osei sent the message and sat back. You told them you're not afraid, Haruki said. She did not sound entirely convinced this was wise. I told them the truth, Osei said. There are 240 warships out there. I know. And you told them we're not afraid. Osei looked at her. Are you? Haruki thought about it. Yes, she said honestly. So am I, Osei said. But being afraid is different from being beaten, and being small is different from being weak. He looked at the display. They need to understand that about us before anything else happens. The message arrived in the council chamber like a stone dropped into still water. Grax watched it in silence. He watched the whole thing, from the small blue world to the lonely searching ships, to the final image of the Resolute against his fleet. He watched the last words appear. We are not your enemy. We are not afraid. We only want to talk. He did not say anything for a moment. Preen, watching from his seat, saw something cross Grax's face. It was there for only a fraction of a second, buried quickly under the hard, professional mask of a military commander. But Preen had 4 eyes, and a lifespan of 300 years, and he had watched a great many people in his time. What he saw on Grax's face was not contempt. It was not dismissal. It was uncertainty. It's a trick, Grax said, but his voice was slightly different now, slightly less sure. It's a story, Preen said quietly. They told us who they are. They told us who they want us to think they are. Yes, Preen agreed, which is a remarkably sophisticated thing to understand if you think about it. They know we might not believe them. They're asking us to consider the possibility anyway. Grax looked at the final frame of the message, the Resolute, 1 ship, against his fleet. They are not afraid, he said. It was not a question. He was turning the words over, testing them, the way you test ice before you walk on it. No, said Preen. They are not. Why not? Preen looked at him. That, he said, is exactly the right question. The fleet continued to advance. Grax had not called it off. He was not ready to do that, not yet. But he had done something he rarely did. He had asked his intelligence officers to run a full analysis of the message. Not just the words. Everything. The encoding method, the image quality, the translation choices, the emotional architecture of the narrative. The report came back in 30 minutes. His lead analyst, a Drahari named Yos, who had served him for 15 years, brought it personally. What have you got? Grax asked. Yos set down her data pad. She looked slightly pale, which for a Drahari was an unusual thing. The translation of their final phrase, she said, is accurate. We verified it against 3 independent linguistic models, She paused. But the more interesting finding is in the encoding. Meaning? They used our own linguistic keys to translate their message. Keys we have never shared. Keys that are embedded in the communication systems of every council ship, but not broadcast openly. She paused again. They extracted them from the signal background, from the passive emissions of our fleet. Grax stared at her. They decoded our encryption keys, Yoss said carefully, by listening to us from a distance, without our knowledge, in less than 3 hours. The silence that followed was very heavy. How? Grax asked. We don't know, Yoss said. Our encryption is considered unbreakable by any civilization in the Council's records. She looked at him steadily. But then, they're not in our records, are they? Grax sat very still for a moment. Outside the viewport, his fleet moved through space like a wall of iron. He thought about what it meant that a species traveling alone, in a single survey vessel, could break Council encryption from passive emissions in 3 hours. He thought about what kind of civilization produced that. He thought about the words, "We are not afraid." For the first time in a very long while, Supreme Commander Grax felt something he had not expected to feel. He felt a chill. Hold the fleet at current position, he said quietly. Do not advance further. Yoss blinked. Sir? Hold position, he repeated, and open a channel to the unknown vessel. He sat back in his command chair and looked at the stars. I want to talk to them, he said, before anything else happens. The channel opened. It was not a clean channel. There was interference from the drift, a low hiss of background radiation that the Council's ships had learned to filter out over centuries of operating in this region of space. The human vessel either could not filter it or chose not to. When the voice came through, the hiss was still there, faintly, behind the words. Grax did not recognize the voice as belonging to any known species. It was in the mid-frequency range, produced by a creature with a single larynx. The translation software worked on it in real time. This is Captain Sarah Vance of the ISV Resolute. I'm glad you decided to reach out. The words were calm, unhurried. There was something in the voice that Grax's translator software flagged as warmth, but also something underneath it that it flagged as controlled tension. This was someone who was choosing their tone deliberately. Grax composed himself. He had decades of practice at this. This is Supreme Commander Grax of the Keth Imperium, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Council. You are an unregistered vessel in outer drift space. Identify your civilization and state your purpose. A pause, brief, less than 2 seconds. Our civilization calls itself humanity. We are from a planet called Earth, orbiting a star we call Sol. Our purpose is exploration. We have been looking for other intelligent life in this galaxy for approximately 300 years. Another small pause. We are very happy to have found some. Grax waited for more. When nothing came, he said, 300 years. You have been in space for 300 years and you found no one? We found ruins, the voice said. A lot of ruins. And a lot of silence. Something about the way she said that made the chamber go quiet. Grax was not sure why. He pressed on. Your vessel decoded our encryption. It was not a question. Yes. How? Another brief pause. I'm going to be honest with you, Commander. I think honesty is the right policy here. Our signal analysis systems are very good. We designed them specifically for situations where we might need to understand an unknown communication system quickly. I won't pretend that's not concerning from your perspective, but we use that ability to talk to you, not to harm you. Grax turned away from the channel for a moment. He looked at Yoss, who was standing at his shoulder. She gave a small nod. The acknowledgement was genuine. They had decoded the encryption and used it to build communication, not to compromise Council systems. You carry weapons? He asked when he turned back. Yes. No hesitation this time. We're a deep space survey vessel. We operate far from home and far from any support. We carry what we need to defend ourselves. Against what? A longer pause this time. When the voice came back, there was something different in it, something heavier. We've found a lot of ruins, she said again. Some of them are very old, and some of them suggest that whatever ended those civilizations was not always natural causes. That landed differently than anything else that had been said so far. Grax looked at the displays around him, at his fleet, at the empty space between his fleet and the single human ship. "You carry weapons," he said slowly, "because you expected to find something dangerous." "We prepared for everything," she said. "That's what we do." In his seat near the back of the chamber, Preen was listening very carefully. He had been a counselor for a long time. He had seen hundreds of first contact situations, from the formal ceremonies when a new civilization joined the council, to the tense standoffs when a civilization decided it did not want to join. He had seen good outcomes and very bad ones. He was listening not just to what the human captain was saying, but to how she was saying it. She was not frightened, that was clear. Not the absence of fear that came from ignorance, but the kind that came from acceptance. She had looked at 240 warships and decided that running was not the right answer. She had stayed. She had opened a channel. And now she was answering questions with complete honesty, including questions that might have been better answered more carefully. Yes, they carry weapons. Yes, they decoded the encryption. Yes, they expected to find something dangerous. Preen had spent 300 years reading people. He was quite good at it. He thought, this is a species that has decided the truth is their best weapon. He thought, that is either a sign of great wisdom or great confidence. He thought, given everything else they have shown us today, it might be both. He raised his hand to speak. Grax paused the channel when Preen raised his hand. He was not required to acknowledge the counselor, but something made him nod. Preen stood up. He was small in the room, dwarfed by the military figures around him. He looked at the speaker that carried the human voice. "Captain Vance," he said, "I am Counselor Preen of the Lon Collective. I would like to ask you something different if you will permit it." "Please," said the voice. "You said you have been searching for 300 years. He paused. "We have records going back 60,000 years. We have a database of every civilization capable of interstellar travel that has existed in this galaxy during that time." He paused again. "You are not in it." "I know," the voice said. "Does that not strike you as strange?" "It strikes us as lonely," she said. "We have wondered about it, whether something kept us hidden, whether we were simply too far off the main routes, whether we developed too slowly by galactic standards." A quiet breath. "We have also wondered whether it was intentional." Preen felt a chill. Intentional. "The ruins we've found. Some of them are from civilizations that clearly achieved interstellar travel. Some of those civilizations ended within a very short period of time, by geological or astronomical standards, and all of them ended without leaving any records we could find in the broader galaxy, as if they had been removed." The voice was careful, measured. "We do not know what that means. We have theories, but we have been very careful traveling out here because of those theories." Preen sat down very slowly. Around him, the chamber had gone very still. The military officers were looking at each other. Grax had a complicated expression on his face. Vethal, who had started the day arguing about grain tariffs, looked like a being who had just realized the conversation had stopped being about grain tariffs some time ago. "You believe," Preen said carefully, "that civilizations are being removed, deliberately." "We believe it is possible," the voice said. "We have never found evidence that proves it, but we have found enough evidence to take the possibility seriously." A pause. "Counselor Preen, in 60,000 years of records, have you ever found a civilization in this galaxy that simply disappeared without explanation?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. On the Resolute, Captain Vance was not alone in the conversation. Osei was at her side, listening, occasionally writing notes. Haruki and Chen were monitoring sensors, keeping watch on the fleet that was still out there, still sitting at position, engines hot. When the channel went quiet for a moment, Chen leaned over. "Captain," he said very quietly, "the fleet isn't moving." "Good. But they're not standing down either. The ships are still in formation, still armed." "I know. We're still in a very bad position here." "I know that too." She did not take her eyes off the speaker. "But we're still talking. As long as we're talking, we're not dying. And we have something they want. What? Answers, she said. Grax stood up. This was unusual. He was not a being who paced. He was not a being who showed uncertainty through movement. But he stood up and walked to the holographic display and looked at it for a long moment. 60,000 years, he said, to no one in particular. 60,000 years of records. He turned to his senior strategic officer. Run a historical analysis. All civilizations that achieved interstellar travel and subsequently disappeared from our records. Not conquered, not absorbed, disappeared. The officer went pale. Sir, run it. The results came back in 4 minutes. It was not a long list, but it was not an empty one either. 17 civilizations, over 60,000 years, that had achieved spaceflight, established a presence beyond their home system, and then simply stopped appearing in any record, without war, without natural disaster, without any traceable cause. 17. Grax looked at the list for a long time. Open the channel again, he said. The channel opened. The quiet hiss of the drift filled the speaker. Captain Vance, Grax said. Commander Grax. The ruins you found, he said. Do you have data on them? We have 3 centuries of survey data, she said. Every ruin we've catalogued, every dead world we've documented, every piece of archaeological evidence we've gathered. A pause. It's a significant archive. Would you share it? A longer pause this time. Then yes, under one condition. What condition? You share yours. Grax looked at Preen. Preen looked at Grax. Between them, something passed that was not quite trust, and not quite agreement, but was the first small piece of something that could become both. Agreed, Grax said. The data transfer took 6 hours. It was the largest single exchange of information between 2 previously unknown civilizations in recorded council history. On the human side, 300 years of deep space survey data, dead worlds, ancient ruins, anomalous signals, unexplained debris fields. On the council side, 60,000 years of historical records, including the 17 disappeared civilizations. The analysts on both sides went to work immediately. On the Resolute, Osei and a team of 3 researchers sat in the small conference room off the main bridge and went through the council data with a focus that blocked out everything else. They forgot to eat, they forgot to drink. Chen brought them coffee at one point, and none of them looked up. On the council side, a team of 40 historians and intelligence analysts worked through the human survey data with growing discomfort. The discomfort grew because of the patterns. Human survey data, collected by a species that had been in space for 300 years, documented 11 dead civilizations in their immediate galactic neighborhood. Civilizations that the Council had no record of. Civilizations that had achieved spaceflight and then gone silent, all within a period of roughly 5,000 years. And 3 of those 11 dead civilizations appeared, based on artifact dating, to have been roughly contemporary with 3 of the 17 disappeared civilizations in the Council's own records. Different parts of the galaxy, different species, different technologies. Same approximate end date. The lead Council analyst, Yos, brought the finding to Grax personally. She set the datapad down without speaking and let him read it. Grax read it twice. Then he sat down, which was another unusual thing for him to do. Get Captain Vance back on the channel, he said. Sir, are you all right? Get her on the channel. The channel opened. Captain Vance, Grax said. His voice was different now. The hard professional edge was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. Our analysts have found something. So have ours, she said. The disappeared civilizations, he said. We think some of them are the same ones we found ruins of, she said. We think the timeline matches. Yes. Commander, she said. What do you know about what ended them? A long pause. Nothing, he said. We have always assumed various causes. Plague, war, environmental collapse. We did not look for a common cause because there seemed to be no reason to. He paused again. Until now. We've been looking for a common cause for 100 years, she said. We have a theory. We have not been able to prove it. Tell me. Not over an open channel, she said. The drift has too much interference. I'd like to meet in person. A brief pause. If you're willing. Grax looked at the holographic display. 240 warships. 1 human survey vessel. You would come aboard a council vessel? He asked. If you come to the Resolute, she said. I'm not going to ask my crew to go aboard an unfamiliar ship, but I'll meet you on mine. I think you'll find it's worth the trip. Another long pause. Very well, said Grax. And somewhere in the back of the chamber, Counselor Preen opened all 4 of his eyes. The shuttle from Grax's flagship was a heavy military transport. It could hold 20 troops in full armor. It arrived at the Resolute's docking port carrying 6 people. Grax himself, his analyst, Yoss, 2 armed guards, who kept their hands away from their weapons with the deliberate care of beings who had been told very firmly to behave, and Counselor Preen, who had invited himself along by the simple method of walking into the shuttle bay and sitting down before anyone could tell him no. The 6th person was Vethal, who had also invited himself, for different reasons. He was not sure what those reasons were yet. He only knew that he had spent the entire day arguing about grain tariffs and feeling like he had missed something important, and he was not willing to miss anything else. The docking connection pressurized. The airlock opened. Captain Vance was waiting on the other side. She was smaller than Grax had expected. The Keth tended to judge species by their physical presence, and this human was unremarkable by that measure. She was perhaps 1.7 meters tall, which was below average even by human standards according to the data they had received. She had a face that showed age without apology. She wore a uniform that was practical and unadorned. But she was standing at the center of the airlock, relaxed, with her hands at her sides, looking at 2 council emissaries, 2 armed guards, and a supreme military commander, and she was not moving. Grax had been in a great many rooms with a great many people. He had a feeling for presence, for the quality of stillness that some beings carried. This woman had it. Commander Grax, she said. Welcome aboard the Resolute. Captain Vance. He looked around the airlock. It was clean, efficient, and entirely non-threatening. The walls had labels on them, he noticed, in a script he did not recognize. The air smelled different from his own ship, something organic, warm. This is my analyst, Yoss. My guards are Tav and Korn, and these 2 gentlemen joined us at the last moment. I am Counselor Preen, said the small alien, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who had been in important rooms long enough to know that announcing yourself was better than waiting to be introduced. And this is Ambassador Vethal. I know, Vance said. She looked at Preen with something that might have been warmth. I recognized your voice from the channel. You asked good questions. Preen blinked all 4 of his eyes, which was the Lan equivalent of a smile. You gave good answers. Come on, Vance said. I'll show you what we found. The Resolute was not large. It had a small conference room, a main lab, and a bridge. Vance took them to the main lab, which had been prepared for this meeting. The walls were covered in holographic displays, star maps, archaeological photos, data tables, timelines, 300 years of human survey work, organized and ready to be walked through. Standing by the displays were 2 other humans, Osei, still wearing his reading glasses on his forehead, who gave the visitors a nod that somehow conveyed both excitement and professional calm, and a younger woman named Dr. Yuki Ando, who was the Resolute's lead archaeologist and who had been living inside the data for the past 6 hours. I'll let them walk you through it, Vance said. She stepped back to the edge of the room. She was not a scientist. She was a captain. Her job right now was to watch the room, not the displays. Osei stepped forward. He had a way of holding a room that had nothing to do with size or volume. He simply spoke as if what he was saying mattered, and people listened. We've been cataloging dead civilizations for 100 years, he said. Not all of them, there are too many for that, but we focused on one specific type. Civilizations that achieved interstellar travel, showed evidence of rapid expansion, and then stopped. No gradual decline, no evidence of slow collapse, just stopped. He pulled up the first display. A map of the local galactic arm, with 11 points marked on it. 11 civilizations in our survey range. All of them achieved faster than light travel. All of them began expanding. All of them ended. He looked at his audience. In every case, the archaeological record shows the same pattern. A rapid expansion phase lasting between 200 and 500 years, then silence. Yoss was already looking at the data with the focused attention of someone who cross-referenced information for a living. Your dating methods, she said. How accurate? Margin of error between 50 and 200 years, Ando said. At these timescales, that's quite precise. Show me the timeline, Grax said. Ando pulled up the timeline. 11 civilizations plotted against time. Expansion phases, then termination dates, estimated within the margin of error. Grax looked at it. Then he pulled out his datapad and overlaid the Council's 17 disappeared civilizations onto the same timeline. The room went very quiet. 3 of the human civilizations and 3 of the Council civilizations shared a termination window. Same approximate period. Different parts of the galaxy, different species, same end. And then, shifted forward by roughly 5,000 years, 4 more. Both lists, same window. And then again, 3 more, same window. 10 civilizations across 2 datasets, 3 distinct termination events, each one spaced roughly 5,000 years apart. It's a cycle, Preen said. His voice was very quiet. It happens on a cycle. That's our theory, Osei said. Something moves through this galaxy on a roughly 5,000-year cycle. When it arrives in a region, any civilization that has achieved interstellar travel and reached a certain level of expansion ends. The word fell into the room like a stone into deep water. And the last event, Grax said slowly, was approximately 5,000 years ago. Yes, Osei said. No one said anything for a moment. You've known about this for how long? Grax asked. We've suspected it for about 100 years, Vance said from the back of the room. We've had data pointing this direction for 50. We've been certain, or as certain as we can be without direct evidence, for about 20. 20 years, Grax said, and you said nothing to us. You did not seek out the Council. We didn't know you existed, she said simply. We had ruins and data and a theory. We had no one to tell. She paused. That's why we were searching. What followed was 3 hours of the most intense scientific exchange in the history of either civilization. Ando and Yos compared datasets with the focused energy of people who had been waiting their whole careers for exactly this kind of information. Osei and a council historian named Rayeth went through 60,000 years of disappearances with fresh eyes, looking for the pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. Grax sat at the edge of the room and watched. He was not a scientist. He was a soldier, but he had commanded fleets long enough to understand something about patterns and threats. He understood tactics. He understood strategy. What he was understanding now was making the scales on the back of his neck stand up. If the cycle holds, he said at one point, to no one in particular, the next event would be between 200 and 800 years from now, Ando said, without looking up from her display, based on the variance in the previous intervals. And we don't know what causes it. No. Or where it comes from. No. Or if it can be stopped. Ando looked up then. Also no. She held his gaze. But those are the right questions. He looked at her for a moment. She was young, he thought. They were all young, these humans. 300 years was young by galactic standards. They were a species that had not even been around for one full cycle of whatever was ending civilizations in this galaxy. And yet they had found the pattern. They had gone looking, in the silence and the ruins, and they had found it. Why? He asked. The question came out before he intended it to. Ando blinked. Why what? Why did you keep looking? 300 years, ruin after ruin, dead world after dead world. Why didn't you stop? Why didn't you stay home and decide the answer was too big and let it go? Ando looked at him for a long moment. Then she glanced at Vance, who was still standing at the back of the room. Vance answered, Because someone has to, she said. The civilizations that ended, they never got the chance to stop it. They never knew it was coming, or if they did, they didn't know what to do. She paused. We found out early. We have time, and so we look. You are preparing, Grax said. It was not quite a question. We've been preparing for 100 years, she said. The problem is, we've been preparing alone, with limited resources, limited technology, and no one to share the data with. She looked at him steadily. You have 60,000 years of history and 240 warships sitting in that drift. Grax was very still. What are you proposing? He asked. Cooperation, she said. Data sharing, research, and if it comes to it, something like a coordinated defense. She paused. We have the theory. You have the resources. Together, we might be able to actually do something about it. Preen had been listening to all of this from a small chair near the wall. He had said very little for the past 3 hours. Now he stood up. I have a question, he said. Everyone looked at him. You said you have been certain of this theory for 20 years, he said to Vance. That something moves through the galaxy on a cycle and ends civilizations. You have been looking for someone to tell. Yes, she said. And you found us today, by accident, in the outer drift. He looked at her carefully. Or did you? A small silence. Vance almost smiled. The outer drift shows up in ruins of 2 of the civilizations we documented, she said. It seems to have been a meeting place historically. We theorized that any surviving spacefaring civilization in this region would likely use it as well. She paused. It took us 8 years to get to this region of the drift. We've been doing slow surveys, looking for energy signatures. You came looking for us, Preen said. We came looking for someone, she agreed. Anyone. We needed help. Preen looked at Grax. Grax was looking at Vance with an expression that was hard to read. Not hostility, not suspicion, something more complicated. You could have sent a warning signal, Grax said. Something broadcasted across the drift. We didn't know if that would be safe, she said. If whatever causes the cycle responds to certain kinds of signals, a broad broadcast could be dangerous. We needed to do this quietly. She paused. A single survey ship, low profile, looking for the right door to knock on. And then you found 240 warships on the other side of that door, he said. Yes. For the first time, something like humor crossed her face. That was not entirely what we planned for. Grax looked at his fleet commander, who was still back on the flagship, presumably very confused about why the Supreme Commander had boarded an unknown vessel and not come back yet. Then he looked at Vance, and Osei, and Ando, with her data on the wall, and Preen, watching him with 4 patient eyes. And he looked at the timeline on the holographic display, 3 termination events, 5,000 years apart, and the next one coming. He made a decision. It was the kind of decision that a person makes when they understand that the thing they came to do is not actually the most important thing in the room. Dismiss the fleet, he said to his communications officer. The officer blinked. Sir? Send them home, he said. Keep 2 escort vessels. The rest go back. He paused. I'm going to be here for a while. The fleet did not go quietly. Admiral Sewell, commanding the Drahari contingent, sent 3 increasingly urgent messages to Grax's flagship before Grax got back on the channel himself. You are ordering the fleet to stand down, she said. Her voice was flat with the effort of not letting something stronger through. Based on a conversation with an unknown species aboard an unvetted vessel. Correct, said Grax. Supreme Commander, I must formally register it, he said, and then send the fleet home. Keep your own ship if you like, but the others go. A pause, a very long pause. Understood, Sewell said. The word had edges on it. The fleet began to move. Not all of them went back. Sewell kept her ship, as Grax had said she could. 3 other commanders did the same, citing various operational reasons that were actually, transparently, curiosity. In the end, 7 ships remained in the outer drift instead of 240. From the bridge of the Resolute, Chen watched the fleet disperse on his sensors with an expression of complete disbelief. They're leaving, he said. I know, said Vance. All 240 of them. Just leaving. 7 are staying, she said. Still, Captain, what did you say to them? She looked at the sensor display for a moment. Then she looked at the door to the conference room, where the sound of people talking fast and pointing at displays was still coming through. The truth, she said. We said the truth. and showed them what we found. She paused. It turns out that's enough, sometimes, when the stakes are high enough. Chen looked at the display. At 7 ships, instead of 240. What happens now? He asked. Now, she said, we get to work. What followed was not dramatic, in the way that the stories people tell about important moments usually make them seem dramatic. It was difficult. It was slow. It was full of miscommunication and misunderstanding and moments where the effort seemed impossible. Grax stayed on the Resolute for 6 days. His guards stayed in the airlock area. Everyone else moved through the ship freely, sharing meals with the human crew, asking questions, getting asked questions in return. Preen, it turned out, was an excellent conversationalist. He and Osei spent most of the first night going through the Council's linguistic database together, and by the morning of the second day, they had built a translation protocol that was significantly better than anything either side had started with. Vethahal spent most of his time following Dr. Ando around the lab, looking at archaeological data with the expression of a being having his fundamental assumptions gently dismantled and rebuilt, which was exactly what was happening to him. Yos and Chen had a very different kind of collaboration. It was tense, occasionally argumentative, and deeply productive. They were both analysts. They thought the same way. They argued about methodology and data interpretation, and the limits of statistical inference. And by the end of the third day, they had jointly produced a predictive model for the next termination event that was more refined than anything either side had managed alone. The model was not comforting. The termination event window, refined with combined data, narrowed to between 150 and 400 years from now. 150 years was not a long time. On the 4th day, the thing that everyone had been not quite saying out loud finally got said. It was Grax who said it. He and Vance were in the small galley off the main corridor, each of them eating something the other could not identify, because the Resolute's food synthesizer had been reprogrammed to handle Keth dietary needs, and the results were experimental at best. Whatever causes the cycle, Grax said, has to be stopped. Yes, Vance said. We have 150 years at minimum, possibly 400. Maybe more. The model has a lot of uncertainty. But possibly only 150. Yes. Grax looked at the thing he was eating. He had not decided if he liked it yet. My civilization has never fought anything like this, he said. We have fought other species. We have fought wars of territory and resources and ideology. We have never fought something that ends civilizations without leaving a trace. Neither have we, Vance said. Your species has been preparing for 100 years. He looked at her. What have you prepared? She was quiet for a moment. Weapons, she said. Technologies, defense platforms, a lot of theoretical work about what kinds of systems might be effective against something unknown. She paused. And ships. A lot of ships. He raised an eyebrow. How many ships does humanity have? She looked at him steadily. That information is classified until we have a formal agreement in place. He processed that. You have been building a military. We have been building a defense force. She said it without apology. For 100 years. Quietly. Because we knew this was coming, and we knew we could not face it alone. But we also didn't know who we might find out here, or whether they'd be friendly. She paused. Turns out you sent 240 warships to say hello. We were right to be cautious. He made a sound that his translator software identified as a Keth laugh. It was very brief and he stopped it quickly, but it was there. Classified, he said, until a formal agreement is in place. That's correct. Then we should make a formal agreement, he said. That was the general idea, she said. The formal agreement took another 8 days. It was called the Outer Drift Accord, named for where it was signed, and it was the first formal treaty between humanity and the Galactic Council. It was not a simple document. It covered data sharing, joint research protocols, communication standards, mutual defense obligations, and a dozen other things that required careful negotiation. Preen wrote most of it, working with Osei and Vethal, and a council legal officer who had been called in via communication relay. The section on mutual defense obligations was the hardest part. Grax wanted specific numbers. Vance wanted flexibility. They argued about it for 2 full days. In the end, The section said that each party would contribute forces proportional to their capability in the event of a confirmed external threat, and that the precise definition of capability and proportion would be negotiated in a follow-up agreement within the following year. It was, as Preen observed to Osei quietly, a polite way of saying they had agreed to figure it out later, but it was signed, and that was the important thing. The signing ceremony was small. Vance, Grax, Preen, and Vethal. The rest of the crew and visitors watched from the edges of the conference room. There were no speeches. Vance had said she was not good at speeches. Grax had agreed that speeches at this point would be a waste of time. They signed. They looked at each other. Then Vance extended her hand, because that was what humans did. Grax looked at it for a moment. He knew, from the briefing data, what the gesture meant. He extended one of his forearms and took her hand. She had a firm grip for such a small person. He nodded once. She nodded back. That was the ceremony. 3 weeks after the Resolute had first appeared in the outer drift, it prepared to leave. The ship had been in the drift long enough for its crew to begin to feel the smallness of it, the way that weeks in a compact space will eventually wear on people. They were ready to move. There was work to do. Grax's flagship was preparing to escort them to the edge of the drift. It was not a courtesy he offered lightly. He had offered it anyway. On the day of departure, Preen came to say goodbye to Osei. They met in the corridor outside the lab. Preen was small. Osei was not large. They stood in the corridor and looked at each other. "You found what you were looking for," Preen said. "We found people," Osei said. "We found a lot of people, actually. Your council has more member civilizations than we imagined." 214, Preen said. 215, if we count humanity, which I intend to argue we should at the earliest opportunity. Osei smiled. "I hope that goes well." "It will be complicated," Preen said. "The Keth block will be resistant. The Drahari will want extensive background checks. Half the council will want to know more about your military capability before they agree to anything." He paused. "Which is why it's important that the information about your fleet size remains classified for the moment." Osei raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" "It is," Preen said, "because the council is more afraid of an unknown military power than a known one, and right now, they do not know your numbers, and that uncertainty is keeping the more aggressive members very cautious." He looked at Osei with 3 of his 4 eyes. The 4th was, as always, watching the corridor. "I would recommend keeping them uncertain for a while longer, just until the relationship is established firmly enough that the numbers no longer matter." Osei looked at him for a long moment. "You are very good at this," he said. "I have had 300 years of practice," Preen said. The Resolute left the outer drift with a Keth flagship escort and a data archive that was, by human standards, beyond anything the Terran Exploratory Service had imagined acquiring. 60,000 years of galactic history, records of 214 civilizations, scientific data, astronomical surveys, biological studies, philosophical texts, and the accumulated wisdom and accumulated mistakes of species that had been reaching for the stars before humanity had invented writing. Chen spent the entire first day of transit just looking at the archive index. He did not actually read any of it. He just looked at how much there was. "We're going to need more people," he said at one point. Haruki laughed. "We're going to need more ships. We're going to need more of everything," said Vance from her command chair. She was looking at the space ahead of them. Not the drift, which was behind them now, but the open space beyond it. Stars and the dark between them. And somewhere in that dark, something on a 5,000-year cycle that had ended civilizations before humanity existed. The difference now was that they were not looking for it alone. The report that went back to the Terran Exploratory Service headquarters took 3 months to travel. It was a long document. It covered the first contact with the Galactic Council, the Outer Drift Accord, the combined data on the termination cycle, and a detailed analysis of what the next steps should be. The last section of the report was written by Captain Vance personally. It was shorter than the rest. She wrote, "We came to the Outer Drift looking for someone to tell. We found 240 warships, which was not what we expected. We found a civilization with 60,000 years of history and resources beyond anything we could have hoped for. We also found that they were carrying a piece of a puzzle that they did not know was a puzzle, and we were carrying the other pieces. She wrote, "The termination cycle is real. The timeline is narrowing. What ends civilizations in this galaxy does not leave survivors, or records, or warnings. Every civilization that has faced it alone, and every one of them has ended." She wrote, "We will not end alone. That is the most important thing that happened in the outer drift. Not the treaty, not the data exchange. The fact that when we knocked on the door, someone opened it." She wrote, "Prepare everything. We have somewhere between 150 and 400 years. That is not enough, and it is more than the others had." She wrote, "We should not waste it." In the council chamber, 3 months after the Resolute had left the drift, Councillor Preen stood up to address the full council. He had been trying to get the floor for 6 weeks. The agenda had been crowded with reactions to the Outer Drift Accord, debates about its legality, arguments about whether humanity should be admitted to the council, and a great deal of hand-wringing from the military bloc about having dismissed the fleet before fully understanding what they were dealing with. He had waited patiently through all of it. Now he stood up. The chamber went quiet, partly out of courtesy to the longest-serving councillor in the room, and partly because Preen had a way of standing up that suggested what he was about to say was worth hearing. "We have argued for 6 weeks," he said, "about the proper procedure for admitting a new species to the council, about the proper vetting of military capability, about the legality of the accord, and the authority of Supreme Commander Grax to sign it without full council approval." He paused. "I want to suggest that we are arguing about the wrong things." The chamber stayed quiet. He had their attention. "The humans came to us with data that suggests something in this galaxy ends civilizations. On a cycle. We have now verified that data against our own records. The pattern is real." He looked around the room. "The next cycle is coming, somewhere between 150 and 400 years from now." Another pause. "We have 150 years, at minimum, to prepare for something that has never been survived." He let that sit. "I propose that the question of whether the accord was procedurally correct is very much less important than the question of whether we are going to be alive in 500 years. Vethlal, from his seat in the diplomatic section, was nodding. Grax, restored to his seat among the military bloc, was looking at the chamber with the expression of a being who had made up his mind and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. Sewell, who had opposed everything about the accord, was very quiet. "The humans are building ships," Preen said. "They have been building them for 100 years. They are building weapons and defense platforms, and a great deal of classified technology they have not yet shared with us." He smiled, and it reached all 4 eyes. "They are preparing, quietly, steadily, without knowing whether they would ever find anyone to fight alongside them." He looked around the room one more time. "I suggest we stop arguing about procedure and start helping them prepare." The vote that followed was not unanimous. It never was, in the Galactic Council, but it passed. The Outer Drift Accord was ratified. Humanity was admitted to the Council as a provisional member, pending a follow-up agreement on the mutual defense obligations. Preen, walking out of the chamber afterward, found Vethlal at his side. The stars twinkled like scattered diamonds against the vast darkness of space. "That's a necessary day," Preen replied. "Do you think they can stop it, the cycle?" Preen considered the question. He thought about Captain Vance in the airlock, small and calm and immovable. He thought about Osei telling stories across the language barrier, and Ando staring at data with the intensity of a person who believed that answers existed and could be found. He thought about a species that had spent 300 years looking for someone to fight beside, and had found them, and had not stopped, and had not given up. He thought about what it meant that those people had been building a fleet for 100 years, in quiet, while they searched. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I have never seen anything survive it." He walked a few steps further. "But then," he said, "I have never seen anything like them either." Somewhere in the dark between stars, on the other side of a very long journey, the ISV Resolute continued home. It carried an archive of 60,000 years of history, a signed treaty, and 87 people who had gone looking for something in the silence of the galaxy, and had found it. Captain Vance sat in her command chair and watched the stars. She thought about the ruins they had left behind, the dead worlds, the civilizations that had achieved everything they dreamed of, and then ended, without anyone knowing why. She thought about the cycle, about the thing that moved through the galaxy and left silence behind it. She thought about 240 warships, and a small alien with 4 patient eyes, and an old Keth commander who had ordered his fleet home because something more important had come up. She thought about what it meant that they were not alone anymore. She thought, it is not enough. It may never be enough. Whatever is coming has ended better civilizations than ours. And then she thought, we have faced worse odds than this before. Not as a species, not on this scale. But she thought about the long history of humanity, about every time a thing had seemed too large, and too dark, and too permanent, and about how sometimes, the people who refused to accept that had managed to change the ending. She did not know if they would survive what was coming, but she knew they would face it standing up. She looked at the stars. She thought, let's get to work. And the Resolute flew on, carrying its small crew and its enormous cargo of hope into the dark between the stars that had never been and would never again be empty.